Hello, everybody. We are still waiting for some people to come in from the waiting room, and we will start in a very short while.
From the levellers to those who trespassed at Kinder Scout, ordinary people are the ones who change history.
Justice is our liberation.
Thank you for this introduction, and welcome to all of you. I hope you managed to come in. Apologies for being late. We had some problems with the interpretation, and it should be all working now. I'm happy to welcome you to our side event during the COP26 in Glasgow. It is a part of a series called Plastics Fueling the Climate Crisis. And this session especially has a focus on the impacted communities. Communities impacted by the production of plastic, pollution by plastic, the plastic waste all over the globe, and the management of plastic waste in different places all over the world. This side event is also part of a series organized by GAIA, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Initiatives. I'm working for GAIA. My name is Huub Schelen, and I'm working as a waste policy coordinator. We are also part of the International Break Free from Plastics campaign. To frame a little bit, this side event is a part of the climate conference, COP26 in Glasgow, where we really need to change things. Our starting point is the relation between plastics and climate. Of course, most attention in the climate debate has been going to emissions coming from fossil fuels in different parts of the life cycle. And plastics has received very little attention. At the same time, it is getting increasingly important from a climate perspective. The production of plastic is increasing, and in a few decades, 20% of the fossil fuels production might actually go to plastics. Plastics are polluting the sea, impacting the capacity of the sea and oceans to function as a carbon sink because of the impact on plankton. Plastic is contributing to anaerobic processes, so without air, landfills, which are causing methane emissions. And methane is a very strong climate gas. And plastic often is ending up in incineration, causing CO2 emissions. Last but not least, often solutions for plastic waste are proposed as refuse-derived fuel. So basically it's burned again, or chemical recycling, which is also ending up in products burned by shipping transport, agricultural transport, and producing CO2 once more. So there is a clear link between climate and plastics. And for today, we will focus on one aspect of that, the impact on communities that are impacted by plastic production, plastic pollution, plastic waste management. We have 4 speakers today in our program, though one still has to come into the session. And we will have the question and answer open during the session. After each speaker, we can do some questions for clarification. If there's more deep questions, we will deal with them after all presentations. And we also have a panel debate after that to look into the lessons learned by those impacted communities, and also what lessons we can learn for the policy level. Our speakers each will speak for roughly 10 minutes. The first speaker will be Sibyl Bullock from Break Free from Plastics, USA. She's working especially on the corporate campaign. Our second panelist will be Alejandra Parro from Environmental Rights Action Network in Chile, dealing with pollution by plastic waste management in her hometown. The third one will be Gop Gaoni Almangohan from Eco-Waste Coalition Philippines. I hope I pronounced your name correct. And our last speaker will be Sharon Lavine from Rice St. James in USA. And she is also one of the Goldman Environmental Prize winners. During the presentation, when you add questions, please also mention who you want to answer your question. And maybe last but not least, this session is being interpreted. So at the bottom, you will have the possibility to choose for English, Spanish, or Portuguese. Our second presenter will be presenting in Spanish. So in case you don't understand Spanish, please go to Portuguese or English. Last and very least, this session is being recorded. So if you don't like that or have problems with that, let us know, or well, we want this to be available also for other people that were not able to join due to time zone reasons or other reasons. So that's in very short my introduction. I'm very happy to see Sibyl. I know it's very early for you, and I hope you got the right as co-host so you can share your screen and start your presentation. Thank you very much, Sibyl.
Thank you. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm just going to share my screen one moment, and welcome everyone. Thanks so much for choosing to join us wherever you are logging in from. We're going to learn a lot together. And yeah, as was said, to your questions. Does everyone see the presentation screen? Yes? Okay, wonderful. So just to begin, some of you might be unfamiliar with the Break Free from Plastic movement and what they're all about. So I thought it would be a good place just to start with a little bit of background on this movement. So the Break Free from Plastic movement, we are a global movement envisioning a future free from plastic pollution. We launched in 2016 in Asia. And since then, more than 11,000 organizations and individuals from all around the world have joined this movement to demand massive reductions in single-use plastics and to push for long-term systemic solutions to the plastic pollution crisis. Break Free from Plastic member organizations, together we share the common values of environmental protection and social justice, and we work together through a holistic approach in order to bring about systemic change under the Break Free from Plastic core pillars. So this means tackling plastic pollution across the whole plastics life cycle, the whole value chain, and we'll get into that together today. So focusing on everything from extraction at the very beginning of the life cycle all the way to disposal, but really prioritizing prevention and providing effective systemic solutions. So let's dive in. And as Hoob kindly introduced me, I'm Sibyl, just so we know. And my role in the Break Free from Plastic movement is coordinating one of our global flagship projects, the Global Brand Audit. So I'm really excited to tell you more about that. What exactly is a brand audit? What is this strange term, right? One of the ways that the Break Free from Plastic movement works to address plastic pollution is through this annual Global Brand Audit initiative, which has galvanized thousands of participants every year since 2018. The annual Global Brand Audit is a citizen science initiative that involves counting and documenting the brands found on plastic waste at a cleanup in order to help identify the companies responsible for plastic pollution. Brand audits are a tool that allow us to gather data and determine which corporations are polluting the most places with the most plastic waste. And it's our way of holding corporations accountable for the plastic pollution crisis they created. So how exactly do brand audits fit into the bigger picture? Well, as a fossil fuel product, plastic is pollution from the very moment the oil and gas is extracted, and it continues to cause pollution at every step along the way, wreaking havoc on human health and the environment. So as you can see here in this graphic, we now know that if the plastic life cycle were a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. And this is why we need to, as we like to say at Breakthrough from Plastic, turn off the tap. If you were to imagine a bathtub where the faucet was running, and the bathtub was overflowing, the first thing we would need to do to clean up the mess is not mop the water while the tap is still open, right? We would need to turn off the tap in order to really address the problem at the source. And that's exactly what we need to do on plastic pollution as well. So if we want to turn off the tap on plastics, this of course means stopping the production of all of the unnecessary single-use plastics that are flooding our communities. And that also means keeping fossil fuels in the ground. So you see how these are connected and deeply interlinked. The plastic and climate crisis are deeply interlinked. With 99% of plastics coming from fossil fuels, plastics contribute to climate change at every stage of the life cycle. So if the global plastic life cycle were a country, as I said, 5th largest emitter in the world. While corporations continue to produce plastic, the health of people and the planet, particularly marginalized communities, youth, people of color, and countries in the global south, continue to feel the impacts most strongly as a result. So these fast-moving consumer goods companies, these companies that produce very, very large amounts of products we use very quickly and very quickly dispose of the packaging, any sort of consumer goods, personal care products, anything wrapped in plastic you'll see at the grocery store. You can consider this to be more or less a fast-moving consumer goods products. These companies need to take responsibility for the plastic pollution and climate crisis, because no matter how hard we might try as individuals to avoid buying plastic and recycling whenever possible, I commend your efforts and keep doing what you're doing. However, this will unfortunately never be enough if we continue to see this problem as something that we can address as individuals. We really need to address the system behind the crisis. With only 9% of all plastics ever produced having actually been recycled, it's just something that we need to acknowledge hasn't been working for a long time with the approach that we've been looking at it with up until now. So the rate that these companies are extracting fossil fuels to manufacture ever more plastic packaging, this will unfortunately continue to undermine all of our best intentioned individual efforts. So our perspective from Break Free through this brand audit initiative is that if we really want to solve the plastic pollution crisis, we need companies to stop producing so much unnecessary single-use plastic in the first place, and instead really urge these companies to move towards real solutions like refill and reuse systems that eliminate the need for single-use plastic altogether. So every year since 2018, we have organized a large global brand audit, bringing together our members and volunteers from all over the world. And we've just recently completed our 2021 global brand audit. So this year, our movement activists have, of course, identified the world's top plastic polluting corporations, and I will share those with you on the next slide. Thanks to over 11,000 volunteers in 45 countries, 440 brand audit events were conducted across 6 continents between the months of January and September 2021. In total, they collected over 330,000 pieces of plastic waste and together we analyzed the data in order to identify the companies polluting the most places with the most plastic waste. It bears a special recognition to acknowledge that young people, particularly those growing up in the global south, have the most to lose from the world failing to tackle both the climate and plastic pollution crisis, despite having done the least to cause them. This year, 1 in 5 brand audit events were youth-led. So a special thank you to our Breakthrough from Plastic youth leaders, particularly in Brazil, Ghana, India, Indonesia, and the Philippines for their very powerful work. And on that note, I'm very pleased to show you our short video made by and with and for these youth activists who will tell you who are this year's top polluters. So, ready? Oh, sorry, one moment. Let's make sure the sound is all the way up.
Did you know that 99% of plastic comes from fossil fuels?
This means the climate crisis is worsening each day. Corporations choose to continue producing plastic.
Corporations are throwing away our future. It's time we take it back by holding them accountable.
Together with volunteers around the world, we conducted brand audits to find out which corporations are polluting the most places with the most plastic.
This year's worst plastic polluters are the Coca-Cola Company, PepsiCo, Unilever, Nestle, Procter & Gamble.
Top polluters, stop throwing away our future.
We demand that you reveal the total amount of plastic you produce, drastically reduce it, and redesign your packaging for refill and reuse.
It's time to break free from plastic.
Okay, so what did you think? Would love to see your reactions in the chat. Were you surprised by these top polluting companies? I don't know. For me, I was not surprised because we have seen Coca-Cola be our #1 top polluting company for 4 years in a row. This year's brand audit found nearly 20,000 Coca-Cola branded products. And by this, we mean the Coca-Cola parent company, right? So the Coca-Cola company that owns Fanta and Sprite and Dasani water and hundreds of these beverage brands. So as has been the case, each year since 2019, we actually found more than double the amount of Coca-Cola branded products than the next top 2 global plastic polluters combined. So this really suggests that Coca-Cola's pledge to collect 1 bottle for every bottle sold is really having very little impact on the company's plastic pollution problem. The PepsiCo company also remains one of our top 3 polluters for the 3rd year in a row. Despite the company's recent voluntary commitments to halve the use of its virgin plastic by 2030, PepsiCo will really need to make a much more ambitious shift to reusable containers in order to move down this list, just given the sheer volume of PepsiCo branded plastic pollution we're still finding around the world. And last but not least, of course, for the very first time since our brand audits began in 2018, Unilever has risen to become #3 top polluter during the very same year that this company is serving as a principal partner for the UN Climate Change Summit COP26 in Glasgow. So given that 99% of plastic is made from fossil fuels and that the fossil fuel corporations are actively shifting their focus to plastic as an increasing source of revenue, Unilever's role in COP26 is particularly problematic. The corporations behind the plastic pollution crisis are also contributing to the climate crisis. These leading top plastic polluting companies like Coca-Cola, Nestle, PepsiCo, and others all buy packaging directly from manufacturers supplied with plastic resin or petrochemicals made by well-known fossil fuel majors like ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron Phillips, Ineos, and Dow Chemical. These companies most responsible for creating the plastic and climate crisis must be held accountable to lead on solving it, rather than wasting time working to greenwash their image. So what we demand from these companies is that they, number one, reveal their total global plastic footprint. Number two, make an absolute reduction in the amount of plastic produced. And number three, redesign their product delivery systems for refill and reuse. If we want to truly turn off the tap on plastic pollution, these companies must stop producing so much plastic in the first place and keep fossil fuels in the ground. So this is why corporate accountability is really necessary to address both the plastic and climate crisis. Instead, in addition to these demands, we've seen that in the last few years, some of these companies have joined some forms of voluntary commitments, right? Things like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation plastic commitments and others, of course, some self-imposed voluntary commitments. But unfortunately, thanks to these tracking initiatives, we've seen that they're really not making changes fast enough or anything really ambitious enough to the scale that is needed. So this is why we really need governments to help hold these companies accountable in order to enforce that these changes are made. So together, the Break Free from Plastic movement has come up with some movement demands for the COP26. And the one that I want to focus on with you is, of course, that we hold petrochemical and fast-moving consumer goods companies accountable in line with the producer pays principle. So this is really essential that this message be heard and echoed at the COP, because as we're coming up with countries' nationally determined contributions in line with the Paris Agreement, plastics is part of this climate crisis. And so in order to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius as recommended by the IPCC, of course, this really requires stopping the petrochemical expansion that fuels plastic production, reducing plastic production significantly, phasing out single-use plastic and packaging across the different sectors, and with that, leaving these fossil fuels in the ground. Thank you very much for your time and looking forward to our next speakers and your questions.
Thank you very much, Sabine. I think that was really impressive. The numbers you showed, also the kind of power behind citizen science and the fact that impacted communities is in fact all of us, especially youth all over the world. I had planned to have some questions for clarification right after each presentation, but I see they are answered in the chat already, including some links to the proper, like the methodology, how people were finding these plastics and other things. So I propose that we keep the other questions which are coming up. I saw some great questions passing by already for the panel at the end. And so you can already go through the chat, Sibyl, to see if there's any questions specifically addressed to you. And I propose we go to the second speaker, Alejandra Parra from Chile. She will do her presentation in Spanish. Alejandra, are you co-host ready for sharing your slides? Okay, perfect. Well, and as I mentioned short, one of the things you're dealing with is kind of how plastic waste is managed in your country and your hometown. So the floor is yours, and thanks for coming and joining, also quite early.
Muchas gracias, Job. Y muchas gracias a todas y todos por estar hoy día participando en este panel. ¿Pueden ver mi presentación? ¿Me confirman? Sí. Muchas gracias. Mari Compulamien, les saludo en Mapuzungún, el idioma del Gualmapu, el territorio ancestral mapuche, donde yo vivo, en Chile. Hoy ocupado no solo por el Estado chileno, sino que también por el Ejército de Chile, debido al estado de excepción constitucional que rige en las regiones del Biobío y la Araucanía desde el 12 de octubre de este año, y que permite la suspensión de derechos constitucionales como el derecho a la libertad de reunión y desplazamiento. La presencia de infantes de marina en la provincia de Arauco dio como resultado la muerte del joven Jordan Yempi, de 23 años, la semana pasada, el miércoles de la semana pasada, quien se encontraba en su casa y recibió un disparo cuando salió a ver qué sucedía en la calle, porque se escuchaban los disparos de los infantes de marina. Sin enfrentamiento ni provocación, infantes de marina patrullaban la comuna de Cañete, disparando a transeúntes y residentes, dejando 3 personas heridas, una de ellas un niño de 15 años que acudía a un centro de asistencia médica. El territorio ancestral mapuche abarcaba desde el Atlántico hasta el Océano Pacífico y desde la altura de lo que hoy es Santiago, la capital de Chile, que era el límite con el Imperio Inca, hasta el archipiélago de Chiloé, donde los mapuche compartían territorio con la gente cahuéscar. La corona española, en el proceso de ocupación colonial, avanzó su ejército hasta el río Biobío, donde a través de un tratado binacional se estableció el límite entre las tierras de la corona española con el pueblo mapuche. Pero cuando los criollos se independizaron para formar lo que hoy es Chile, ignoraron este tratado y avanzaron su ejército para colonizar hasta la Patagonia. Hoy las tierras en manos de la gente mapuche se reducen a un 5% del territorio ancestral. En la región de la Araucanía, las comunidades mapuche poseen menos del 15% de la superficie regional y, sin embargo, la mayor parte de los vertederos municipales han sido localizados dentro de sus comunidades. Este es el ex vertedero de Temuco, la capital de la región de la Araucanía, que se ubicó en el corazón de 30 comunidades mapuche que hasta el día de hoy no cuentan con agua potable. Como el vertedero de Temuco, otros 17 vertederos municipales se localizaban en comunidades mapuche de la región, lo que constituye una realidad de racismo ambiental que fue denunciada el año 2007 ante Naciones Unidas por las comunidades afectadas y con el apoyo de la RADA, de la Red de Acción por los Derechos Ambientales. De allí en adelante, y gracias a la constante presión de las y los denunciantes, muchos de estos vertederos comenzaron a cerrarse. El vertedero de Temuco se cerró el año 2016 y la municipalidad de Temuco adjudicó el nuevo sistema de manejo de residuos al proyecto WTE Araucanía, una planta de incineración que está desde entonces en evaluación ambiental. Las comunidades mapuche amenazadas por este contaminante proyecto solicitaron el año 2019 la realización de una consulta indígena, solicitud que hasta el día de hoy no ha sido contestada. Las comunidades mapuche siguen luchando por el rechazo de la evaluación ambiental de este peligroso proyecto de incineración de basura. Además de los sistemas de entierro de basura, los sistemas de barrido de calles y de puntos verdes para la separación de reciclables en las ciudades, paradójicamente, también aportan a la contaminación del territorio mapuche, como podemos ver en estas imágenes, donde los puntos verdes se localizan al lado de cursos de agua que se ven contaminados con los residuos que se acumulan allí. El consumo de productos plásticos desechables ha crecido enormemente en los sectores rurales, tanto en el consumo doméstico como en la producción agrícola, que es lo que se ve en la imagen al lado izquierdo. ¿Y qué sucede con los desechos de estos productos en el plástico? Perdón, en el campo. Por lo general, se queman, con la consecuente generación de contaminantes tóxicos como dioxinas y furanos, precursores del cáncer, enfermedad que ha crecido enormemente en las últimas décadas, llegando a ser la principal causa de muerte en la región de la Araucanía. Las bolsas plásticas desechables posibilitan el transporte de basura a todas partes, donde las riberas de los ríos se transforman en microbasurales. Las decisiones de todo tipo de instituciones públicas no protegen la salud ambiental ni de la población. El uso de plásticos reciclados como material estructurante para el drenaje de aguas lluvias, como es el que se muestra en esta imagen, es premiado en las licitaciones del Ministerio de Vivienda. Cuando le preguntamos a este ministerio si existía alguna evaluación de los riesgos ambientales del uso de estos materiales, nos contestaron que se someten a una norma, pero al solicitar dicha norma, terminaron reconociendo que esa norma no existe. Los incendios de los vertederos también son una forma de contaminación sumamente tóxica que afecta sobre todo a la población más vulnerable que siempre se encuentra en los alrededores de los vertederos y rellenos sanitarios. Esta imagen es del incendio del vertedero de Ovalle, que se inició hace 4 días y que posiblemente todavía se encuentre activo, afectando a las comunidades del sector. Y en el desierto de Atacama, en el norte de Chile, entre 140 y 170 toneladas de ropa se queman cada semana, emitiendo iguales cantidades de dióxido de carbono y más sustancias cancerígenas por la quema del plástico, que es el principal componente del material con que se fabrican estas prendas de vestir. Las emanaciones tóxicas de estas quemas afectan principalmente a las comunidades atacameñas y al pueblo de Alto Hospicio, que tiene un alto porcentaje de población en situación de vulnerabilidad. Finalmente, lo que necesitamos no es reciclaje del plástico ni soluciones de mercado. Lo que necesitamos es la descolonización de los territorios, el reconocimiento y ejercicio de los derechos de los pueblos originarios y criollos a la libre determinación y a la autonomía y a recuperar sus propios sistemas de producción local. Les agradezco por su atención y quedo atenta a sus comentarios y consultas.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. I think this was a really good example of the other side of plastic, which we normally do not see. And especially with the indigenous people that already are in the worst position. I think this is very moving. I did not see in the chat questions for clarification, so I think there also came up some additional resources, some other questions that will definitely contribute to the panel debate at the end. Questions on solutions, questions also on do we really need to live without plastic? So we'll keep that for the end. And thank you very much for now. And in the debate, you will speak in English, right? In the panel debate. Okay.
Sí.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are going to our panelist number 3. I'm always unsure if I pronounce your name correctly. So can I ask you once to just pronounce it correctly? And after that, I will keep saying Gob to make it more easy.
You can just say Gob. That's how
Okay.
most people refer to him.
Thank you very much. Well, you are from the Philippines, working for the Eco Waste Coalition. And one of the things you have done is having court cases as quite a different methodology to fight the impacts of plastic waste. You've been dealing with waste to energy plant in Philippines as well. So I'm really curious for your presentation. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Hugh. So, right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this side event to the COP26. Thank you as well to the organizers of this event for this opportunity to share our experiences in the Philippines. Allow me a moment to share my presentation. Can I just confirm if the presentation is showing? All right, thank you. All right. So this morning I'll be presenting our experience with the solid and plastic waste crisis in the Philippines, and in particular, the strong push that we've seen to promote waste to energy as a solution. Right. To situate my, excuse me, all right. No. All right. To situate my presentation, allow me to give a quick profile of the crisis in the Philippines. So in the country produces 16.63 million tons of municipal solid waste per year. That's the third largest in Southeast Asia. Right. Of this 16 million, about 1.76 million is plastic waste. In terms of percentage, that accounts for about 10.55%. Right. Government data, unfortunately, simply lumps plastic of whatever kind under the general category of recyclables, which is unfortunate because not all plastics are actually recyclable. Right. And so recyclables in general account for about 27 or 28%, with biodegradables accounting for about 52%. Hazardous waste accounts for roughly 2%, with residual waste accounting for about 18%. Right. So there's a data available on the type of waste that's generated in the country on a day-to-day basis. Unfortunately, in terms of management and disposal, right, all of these end up in the same place, in sanitary landfills, because solid waste management in the country has been pretty one-dimensional in the last 2 or 3 decades. Right. So essentially, the only solid waste management tool that's been widely employed by the government is the construction and establishment of sanitary landfills, or SLFs. So according to government data, there are 166 solid sanitary landfills all over the country. Now, while 166 may seem like a lot, it really isn't, especially when you look at coverage. So in reality, only roughly 22% of local government units actually have access to a sanitary landfill. That means that nearly 80% of all the cities and municipalities in the Philippines do not have access to a sanitary landfill or a proper disposal site. Right? So what we have is a situation where there's a lot of solid and plastic waste and no way to treat it and nowhere to put it. This problem is compounded even more by the existence of so many illegal dump sites all over the country. This chart shows the number of illegal dump sites in each of the 16 regions of the Philippines. When we say illegal dump site, what we mean are essentially open dump sites that excuse me, that do not have proper treatment facilities, dump sites that do not have any kind of measures to prevent leakage and seepage, dump sites that use open burning and incineration. And according to government data, there are over 350 of these all over the Philippines. Right. Now, one thing I'd also like to highlight is that all this data is updated as of 2018. And so that's another problem, right? That even the government does not have up-to-date data on the amount of waste produced and the number of treatment facilities and sanitary landfills to deal with that waste. Considering the health crisis of 2020 and 2021, we can actually reasonably expect that the volume of wastes and the number of illegal dump sites have likely gone up since this data was collected in 2018. And so that's a crisis we're faced with in the Philippines. We have a lot of solid and plastic waste and no means to deal with it. Thus far, the solution has been very one-dimensional. It has been essentially just to keep building sanitary landfills. Right? And the irony of this all is that if we go back to the legal framework, the environmental legal framework of the Philippines, we've actually been blessed with very comprehensive and progressive laws, which I'd like to go into now. Right? So for instance, the Philippine Constitution expressly recognizes a right to a balanced and healthful ecology. It also recognizes a right to health. Right? And the state is mandated to protect and advance these rights. The Philippines also has a comprehensive Clean Air Act, right, which places a great deal of emphasis on proper air quality management, everything from air quality monitoring and control to strict ambient air quality standards. And the key thing that I want to highlight about the Clean Air Act is that it contains a categorical and express ban on incineration. In other words, it is illegal to burn waste or to put it through any kind of thermal process. On the more specific issue of solid waste management, there's also the Comprehensive Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. This law places a lot of emphasis on proper waste management in accordance with the waste hierarchy, beginning with proper waste characterization and segregation, proper source reduction, and final disposal. So all these laws and others that I did not mention exist in the country. And yet we are still faced with a solid waste and plastic waste crisis. One of the key reasons for that is that while these laws exist, these have not been properly implemented. Right? For instance, there's a mandate for source reduction. And yet, all over the country, there is a marked lack of recycling facilities, composting facilities, and materials recovery facilities. As I showed you earlier, the solution has been pretty much just put all that waste in a sanitary landfill. And they don't even have that everywhere. And so really and all of these failures taken together have led to what is essentially a severe garbage crisis in the country. Right. And unfortunately, this crisis has led policymakers and the private sector to push for quick fixes rather than comprehensive long-term solutions. And so one of these quick fixes and false solutions that they've advocated in recent years is the promotion of waste to energy and the encouragement of the construction of waste to energy facilities. So the theory behind waste to energy is that it will have two segments. Right? The first segment gathers, collects, and treats waste, which it will then process into electricity or energy. So in theory, it sounds great, right? And this is exactly how proponents have sought to market WTE. They've propagated several myths with respect to waste to energy facilities. I've summarized them into four, essentially that waste to energy facilities are economical, waste to energy facilities are good sources of energy, that they provide a source of clean and renewable energy. Right? They have greenwashed this dirty technology and false solution. And so in recent years, we've seen a flurry of proposals for WTE facilities all over the country. And the funding mechanisms have been varied. But the top three we've found are through public-private partnership, official development assistance, and assistance from international financial institutions. Now, the problem with these top three funding sources is that these are all from the sectors of the community and that have a strong influence on public policy. The private sector has strong ties with the government and is able to influence policy making to favor WTE. The same is true for official development assistance provided by more developed countries, and as well as assistance from international financial institutions. Right. So, which has led us to essentially our three key concerns. Right. I'd love to debunk the WTE myths one by one, but that would take too much time. So I'll just summarize it into the key concerns that we've experienced, that we've encountered. So top among these is the threat to the financial stability of local governments, which addresses really the claim that WTE facilities are economical. Data from all over the world shows that this is simply not true. Right? In reality, WTE facilities do not provide a lot of energy. And so the energy segment of the facility cannot actually sustain the waste collection segment of the process. And so what happens? In practice, what has really happened is that these facilities are propped up and maintained by tipping fees and onerous put or pay provisions, right, paid for and shouldered by local governments, which of course ultimately is shouldered by the community through taxation, right? And so that's a key concern we have. In many of the contracts we've seen, these dangerous tipping fees and put or pay provisions exist and have been accepted because of a lack of understanding of the danger that they bring. Now, our second key concern is, of course, the direct impact on public health and the environment. I think my colleague already mentioned that WTE facilities produce a lot of dioxins and furans. Dioxins and furans, to put it simply, are among the most toxic substances known to science. They cause a wide variety of diseases, and more importantly, they are persistent pollutants that bioaccumulate in the ecosystem and in the human bodies. In addition, WTE facilities and incinerators also produce a lot of CO2 emissions. So WTE facilities are a danger to health and also accelerate climate change. So far from being clean and renewable, right, WTE facilities and incinerators are precisely the opposite. But 1 and 2 are essentially true for pretty much anywhere in the world. Now, what I'd like to highlight next is really key concern number 3. And it's something that we're seeing in the Philippines. Because of the push by government for WTE facilities, with the backing of the private sector, first world countries, as well as international financial institutions, we have seen a steady erosion of statutory and regulatory rules to protect public health and the environment. So for instance, currently, in the Congress of the Philippines, there are pending bills, right, that seek to promote WTE facilities. A key point of these pending bills is that they seek to lift the ban on incineration under the Clean Air Act, the law which I mentioned earlier. Secondly, the bill, if enacted, will characterize waste-to-energy facilities as renewable and entitle it to incentives under the Renewable Energy Act of the country. So it's going to be incentivized as a renewable energy project, taking away incentives and investments from projects that are genuinely renewable, like wind, solar, and wave. And finally, one dangerous provision in these pending bills is that they seek to penalize local government units that do not adopt WTE programs. Now, the bill is couched in language which suggests that the adoption of WTE is not mandatory, while at the same time adding penal provisions. So in reality, it's a carefully designed move to ensure that WTEs are adopted, while in the same breath saying you still have a choice. And so we've been working to oppose this. Another problem we've encountered is that the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, which is the national agency on the protection of the environment in the Philippines, has also issued WTE guidelines. Briefly, the guidelines authorizes the establishment of WTE facilities that use thermal processes. Right? The guidelines also do not provide any effluent standards for dioxins. They have no requirements for sampling and testing. They have no minimum technology standards. It's essentially a blank check, allowing WTE facilities to be established with limited checks and balances. Now, currently, there's also a move by the Department of Energy to also adopt WTE guidelines. That's not been issued, but it's something that they're considering and are working to issue. So in the Philippines, because of the push, right, from the private sector, from first world countries, and from international financial institutions, fundamental protections for the environment and for public health that have existed in Philippine law for at least 20 years are now slowly but surely being eroded. And that is a key concern that we have. So what have we done? I'd like now to go to our WTE campaign and share with you our experience. Of course, you always start with the grassroots. Right. So we've worked with communities where WTE projects are proposed, are being constructed, and have mobilized communities to really speak out and move against these WTE projects. We've also worked hard to promote zero waste and single-use plastic bans in various local communities in the Philippines. But as important as grassroots campaigning is, right, we've also found it necessary to really lobby and engage with the government. Right? So at the national level, we've been sitting in congressional hearings to voice our opinions and provide technical assistance, right, to oppose the enactment of the WTE bills. In various local governments, we've also initiated relationships. We also began relationships with local governments, right, to help them oppose the implementation of WTE projects within their respective local jurisdictions. Right. But in extreme cases, but sometimes even these two aren't enough. And so in extreme cases, we've actually taken legal remedies. The thing that you've intimated earlier. Right. So earlier this year, we filed a petition with the Supreme Court to nullify the government's WTE guidelines. Right. We attacked it on the basis that it is unconstitutional and that it is a fundamental violation of the people's right to health and the right of balanced and healthful ecology recognized in Article 2 of the Constitution. Now, in various regional courts, we've also initiated petitions to restrain the implementation of WTE projects. Right. Now, we've been met with various levels of success, but legal remedies have been a useful tool for us in our campaign against false solutions like WTEs. Right. And just to sum up, just to end this, I'd also like to share with you our other campaigns. So in addition to our campaign against WTE, we've also campaigned hard for the enactment of a national statute banning single-use plastics. We've also campaigned for comprehensive regulations and extended producer responsibility. Right? Because at the end of the day, it's not enough to just campaign against WTEs. There should also be positive regulations, right? Banning single-use plastics and ensuring that producers are made liable for the plastics they produce and the waste that the plastic generates. Right. So thank you for listening. Thank you again for this opportunity to talk to all of you. I'd be happy to address any questions at the end of the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gab, for this extensive overview and all the impressive work you are doing in the Philippines. It's really good to see the other side of waste to energy as a solution and to see the legal methods and public actions you're doing to change the situation. I think there were some questions for you, but not so much a clarification. Maybe you can answer some of them in the chat already. And as we are getting a bit behind schedule, I would like to move on to the last speaker. Somehow things went wrong and we did not have Sharon Levine come into the meeting to do her presentation. We tried to reach out to her, but it did not work. Fortunately, we had a plan B, or better said, we have Jane, which is not a plan B, but who woke up very early this morning and who's ready and willing to give a presentation instead on Formasa, which is one of the big plastic producers in USA. Jane, I'm really happy you can help us out. I hope you got the co-hosting rights so you can share your screen as well. And please be welcome to take the floor. If not, can any of the real hosts give the co-hosting rights for sharing screen to Jane? Good morning, Jane.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Hub. I am very happy to be able to join you today. I'm no substitute for Sharon, and I hope that at some point you will all get to hear Sharon speak and talk about her leadership of us in Louisiana. So I am joining you today from South Louisiana, which is where I live and where I'm from. I've lived here my whole life. It's the place in the world that I am most connected to. And I've tried to live other places and I find it very difficult. But sometimes it's pretty difficult to live here as well. As many folks know, we are heavily polluted by industrial manufacturing sites. There's oil and gas refining. There are increasingly different kinds of petrochemicals, plastics production, fertilizer production, pesticides production. And these are all highly concentrated in areas where people live. And often the people who live near these industrial sites, when we try to organize and stop them from being built, we are met with just an incredible amount of resistance. It's like trying to negotiate with a brick wall, and it's very difficult to actually stop any of this chemicals, petrochemicals, or plastics development from going forward here. But we keep going under the leadership of folks like Sharon, and our persistence here and Sharon's persistence here has actually led to some victories. We have managed to make some companies not want to build here. We have managed to stop some permits from being issued. And right now, our largest battle is one that is very relevant to the international community, because this plant that is currently being planned to be built in South Louisiana would not just harm us, it would actually have global impacts around the world. And so that's what I'm hoping I can tell you just a little bit about. I am going to quickly share my screen. So who can you confirm that you're seeing this slide? Okay, great. So recently, my organization, the Center for International Environmental Law, in partnership with Earthworks and the Center for Biological Diversity, put out a comprehensive report about the history of a particular company, Formosa Plastics Group, as a case study for the environmental and human rights implications of plastics production. The report details Formosa Plastics Group's decades-long history, exemplifying the profound risks that the plastics industry poses to human health, human rights, ecosystems, and the global climate. And this was not just a research endeavor for me. I live downriver from where they want to put the Formosa Plastics plant, and I drink and feed to my child the water that would be polluted by this plastics production plant if it's allowed to be built. And I breathe the air that it blows down the river from this plant. So this is very personal for me, and it's very personal for all of us. The report looks at the pattern of human rights violations and environmental degradation from Formosa Plastics facilities around the world, but unfortunately that pattern is not exceptional. Communities living in the shadow of plastics and petrochemicals facilities have experienced similar disasters and tell similar stories, underscoring that the plastics industry itself poses significant and recurring threats to people around the world. The report concludes with calls to action for policy and decision makers with regard to this particular company, Formosa Plastics Group, but also with recommendations for policy actions to hold all companies accountable and to stop the plastics crisis and the harm that it engenders. And why are we talking about the plastics crisis generally? And how do we talk about Formosa Plastics Group as a case study? Well, our research actually focused in on the plastics and petrochemicals products that are manufactured by Formosa Plastics Group. And these are not unusual products in the plastic supply chain. They include ethylene and its downstream plastics, polyethylene terephthalate, PET, HDPE, high density polyethylene, low density polyethylene, in addition to ethylene glycol, ethylene oxide, ethylene dichloride, propylene, and its resultant plastic, polypropylene, Formosa also makes caustic soda, hydrochloric acid, vinyl chloride monomer, and its resultant plastic PVC. They also make caustic soda, hydrochloric acid, and paraxylene. The report details the negative significant known health impacts associated with each of these products, and they are many. Many of these products and components and additives are known human carcinogens or have other demonstrated toxic impacts on people, especially children. These impacts include headache, nausea, vomiting, respiratory difficulty, fainting or coma, neurotoxicity, skin and eye burns, frostbite, behavioral changes, in addition to the cancer-causing impacts. Because of the toxicity of the chemical inputs and the byproducts associated with petrochemicals and plastics production, the refining and manufacturing processes of plastics have inherent risks to human health and the environment. Anywhere this stuff is being made, it is harming the people who live nearby. And Formosa has a pretty heavy footprint. When such dangerous industrial processes are run by a company with a track record of environmental health and safety violations, workers and local communities are facing heightened risks. The report that we uncovered, shows an overview of key incidents in the history of the company and its affiliates, illustrating the human and environmental toll of the company's business practices. Across the United States, Cambodia, Vietnam, and its home country of Taiwan, the company has a long history of risking public harm for private gain and polluting workers and communities at unnecessary risk. The report goes through hundreds of incidents, large and small, during its 65 years of operation, showing Formosa Plastics Group or its subsidiaries have been labeled variously as a serial offender, a state's biggest polluter, and the entity responsible for a country's worst environmental disaster. In addition to a track record of apparent disregard for worker and community safety, Formosa Plastics Group has been repeatedly hostile toward residents working to protect health and safety, ways of life, livelihoods, economies, and resources near sites the company operates. Any of you in this session who live near a plastics production site are probably seeing yourself in that sentence, because we are all experiencing that. We see that safety failures and environmental violations at Formosa Plastics and other plastics facilities have resulted in harm to potentially thousands of people. There have been dumping of toxic waste that has resulted, toxic waste that was laden with mercury, resulting in the deaths of 5 people and at least 600 more injuries in the ensuing panic after the waste was dumped. We see an explosion in a facility in Illinois where 5 people died, including a husband and wife team who worked at the plant, and 8 more were injured. The plant actually never reopened after that explosion. In Texas, also in the US, where repeated incidents at Formosa Plastics facilities have led to explosions, leaks, fires, resulting in nearly 4 dozen injuries and putting the surrounding community into lockdown several times. In Vietnam, where allegedly rushed construction demands and apparent corner cutting resulted in the direct loss of at least 14 lives, physical injuries to dozens more, and where a toxic waste discharge at the Formosa Plastics Steel Production Company decimated 125 miles of coastal Vietnam, killing 300 tons of fish and limiting the livelihoods of more than 200,000 people, according to government estimates. The country still has not fully recovered because that was only in 2016. And in Yunlin County, Taiwan, where Formosa's largest facilities operate, over 10,000 people have been forced to evacuate because of gas leaks after an explosion. And scientists have linked significant cancer rates in the area to Formosa Plastics Group's facilities there. And that's not to mention the repeated fires, the repeated safety incidents at these facilities. And Formosa plans to build in Louisiana. This is actually why I was invited to join you today, is to talk about, or why Sharon was invited to join you today, is to talk about Formosa's plans to build in Louisiana. They have an existing facility in Texas, which is right next door to us, that just 2 years ago was the subject of a citizen lawsuit. Visible all over the bay around this facility were billions of tiny plastic pellets called nurdles that come out of the production process. Nurdles are the industry nickname for the pellet form used to transport plastic resins before production and processing into familiar plastic products. The pellets are not just a nuisance, they can be noxious. Like nearly all plastics, nurdles contain endocrine disrupting chemicals that harm fish, animal, and human populations. And nurdles can also be vectors for other toxicants and pathogens, accumulating other contaminants and being mistaken by fish for food. And of course, we eat fish. It took nearly 10 years of daily sample collections and a citizen lawsuit by Diane Wilson in Texas next door to hold Formosa Plastics Group accountable for the discharge of pellets. In 2019, a judge cited the collected evidence of over 20 million nurdles as an indication of enormous violations, pinning the company as a serial offender and criticizing state regulators for not ensuring the site was in compliance. Formosa agreed to a $50 million settlement of that lawsuit, the largest ever reached in a case of that kind in the United States. And yet the company still plans to expand. Its high-profile expansion project in St. James, Louisiana, is poised to exacerbate systemic racism, to undermine human rights, and to inflict environmental harm. The St. James complex, dubbed by developers as the Sunshine Project, actually encompasses plans for 14 total plants or facilities, all permitted under a single permit. The facility is planned to be built in a predominantly Black part of St. James Parish, where more than half of the parish's industrial facilities are already located. That's where Sharon lives, and that's why it's so important that she is leading us in this fight. And that facility is currently permitted to double the toxic emissions in St. James Parish, in addition to releasing more than 13 million tons of CO2 equivalent into the atmosphere. 13 million tons of CO2 from this single facility. This is why it's relevant to everyone. And Hoob, I see you off mute. This is my last slide. And the report that we put together also goes through a very in-depth analysis of the human rights that are being violated by Formosa Plastics Group. And generally, we see that these violations of human rights patterns happen across plastics production sites. There are obligations that our governments have, as we well know, to protect human rights, and private enterprises and companies also have a responsibility to protect those same rights. And what we find is that Formosa Plastics Group appears to have violated or been complicit in the violation of a suite of human rights, including freedom of expression and association, freedom from arbitrary detention and torture, violations of the freedom from discrimination, violations of the right to a healthy environment, access to information, rights to remedy, health, and to a dignified life. There is an inherent risk posed by plastic production. And we hope that this report, and I hope that this presentation serves as both a warning and a reminder that the risks to human rights and the environment detailed within this report are not limited to Formosa Plastics Groups. They are systemic throughout the plastics industry. petrochemical facilities pose a threat to surrounding populations and their workers due to the hazards of their daily operations and the ever-present risk of an accident, regardless of their location or what company is operating them. And across the world, petrochemical facilities are disproportionately located in low-income and marginalized communities. How do I stop sharing? Okay. We have actually asked leaders around the world to ensure that Formosa is, that there is justice for the people who have been affected by Formosa Plastics Group and its track record of abuses and harms, and that there is remedy available to them. We are asking leaders to take into account a company's track record when there is discussion of a new permit or a new facility. And we are asking leaders and policymakers to look across the plastics industry and adjust all of our responses, including the way these projects are financed, to address human rights violations and take those into account. As I mentioned at the top, this is personal for me. This is my home. This is our home, and we deserve better than what these companies have planned for us. And I hope that someday y'all actually do get to hear from Sharon and you get to see a session that she's in, because she is a little less dry than I am and very inspiring. And with that, Hoob, I will hand it back to you.
Thanks a lot, Jane, and thanks for this shocking picture of the plastic production site, and apart from the immense impact on climate, also all the other human rights, health, and all the other impacts. There were some questions in the meantime on getting the presentations of the presenters. Well, as you know, this session is recorded, so we will probably make it available through the GAIA website. We will also make sure that presentations are available and some of the other resources that are presented here. I have to apologize for running late because we had planned to have at least half an hour for questions, answers, discussions, and we did ask for extensions, so we will have 10 minutes more. We can run until well, 15 minutes from now, and I will give priority to the questions we identified on the chat that we felt were really relevant and also touching upon the bigger picture and the bigger policy thing. One thing I want to say at the moment, after Jane's presentation, Jane is also one of the people working on a manifesto, which is already widely spread, asking the United Nations to, and the countries of the world, to come with a treaty on plastics, a UN treaty on plastic, to address the whole plastic problem. As this is something which is comparable to climate, ozone layer risk, and that needs to be addressed on the global level. And we are also working with a large group of NGOs on trying to get a mandate to set up a treaty, a global treaty on plastics in February next year at the meeting in Kenya. So that's some background. If you want to have more information, please come back to us, reach out to us. And I will move to some of the questions. And for that, I'm starting with the first speaker, with Sibyl. Sibyl, one of the questions to you was from Yolanda on the Brent audits. And her question was, did you show this video or the presentation on the conclusions of your Brent audits? Did you share that with the companies, with the respective CEOs, and or presented at their shareholder meetings even? Sibyl, please.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So this latest report we actually just published 2 weeks ago. And so we definitely got significant media coverage, over 100 media articles from all over the world in about 10 different languages. So hopefully by now the top polluters have heard about it, and some of them have actually issued official responses thanks to pressure from journalists. But most of these companies' shareholder meetings are next year. But I really like where your head's at, and we will definitely be mobilizing our energy to bring this message to their attention at that time.
Okay, thank you very much, Sibyl. Then, apart from, of course, people asking to share your contact, maybe you can put it in the chat, but I think you might have done already. The other question is for Patrick, from Patrick, for Alejandra. And Alejandra is asking, what is the role of the government of Chile in subsidizing and or protecting the incineration industry? And what are the impacts to the health of the workers in this industry? So could I pass that question to you?
Yes, thank you for that question. Well, fortunately, the incineration industry is not advancing his work here in Chile. Citizens organizations and Mapuche communities have successfully stopped the advancing of this industry in Chile up to now. But the successive governments have tried to push this industry over communities. They have been supporting proposals for the building of incinerators in the Araucanía region and also in Santiago, the capital. But they haven't been able to build one yet. So we are still fighting against this industry and very successfully up to now. And the proposal for Araucanía region is still under environmental assessment, and it might be voted in January next year. So we'll keep on the fight to make sure it is going to be rejected.
Thanks a lot, Alejandra. I think the next question I have is for Gab, and I think it also probably relates to the other people, because it's not so much a question of content, but you are fighting a great fight. But the question is, how can you get and deal with all the crap that is out there right now? And I can imagine the question because I sometimes see all this wonderful myths, solutions coming up, all the greenwash, all the, well, just the fact that plastic is not anywhere on the agenda for the climate conference. It says enough. So question to you, Gab, is more a personal one. How do you deal with that?
I mean, I can only answer from the context of the Philippines, right? So I actually have two answers, right? Which I think I already provided in the chat, but I'll repeat. So at the first level, right, we actually have a very comprehensive solid waste management statute, right, which really emphasizes the following the solid waste management hierarchy. So everything from proper segregation, proper collection, recycling, upcycling, zero waste initiatives, right? And so our consistent call has always been what to do with the waste that's in the Philippines now. Implement the law properly. It hasn't been implemented since it was enacted over 20 years ago, right? So if there's a problem, whatever problem now is partially because of the lack of implementation of this comprehensive statute. So that's one of our consistent calls. At a more practical level, the second level to my answer is we've also worked with hundreds of communities all over the Philippines to promote and establish and promote zero waste projects, and we've found a lot of success there. Right, we have projects all over, several projects all over Luzon, which is the northern area of the Philippines, and where we've been able to really establish clear zero waste cities. Right, and so zero waste is to put it simply, zero waste works. We have experience with zero waste actually working. And so that's my short answer. Of course, the real answer would be far too long, far too complex. But to put it simply, yeah, zero waste works. We've tried it, and it's been successful.
Thanks, Gob. I think that's really an important point. As I think the NGOs working on waste have really shifted from opposing just waste production or incineration to coming up with really viable solutions like the zero waste cities. And that's really giving a lot of energy and a lot of inspiration. Thank you. Jane, there's one more technical question for you from Paulina. No, sorry, from John. And that's on PFAS. I know that's a big issue in Netherlands, Belgium, Europe. 3M company in Belgium was last week partially closed because they totally polluted all of the environments. How is that with Formosa and rest of the plastic industry? Do you have an idea about that?
I was worried you were going to ask me this question. It is my understanding that they're actually, I have seen no record of PFAS being part of Formosa Plastics production or supply chain. It's not that there aren't other persistent chemicals or forever chemicals that are part of the production supply chain, but PFAS specifically didn't come up in our research as a concern for Formosa or other plastics producers. But of course, you mentioned the 3M company, right? The 3M company originates in Minnesota in the United States, which is upriver on the same river from the one that Formosa wants to build on. So as we think about whether or not these particular companies are producing forever chemicals, PFAS and the like, it's also relevant whether or not they're going to be polluting the same environments where PFAS and other chemicals are present. And since Formosa Plastics is planning to build on the Mississippi River, which is also where the 3M facility is upriver, and these are forever chemicals, we are going to see a cumulative impact of everything Formosa is putting into the environment on top of the PFAS and forever chemicals that are already there. And one of our big concerns in Louisiana and other places is that we have no study on the cumulative impacts of exposure from all of these industrial sites, from all of these forever chemicals. We don't know how they will affect human health, at least not on a data level. We know it anecdotally because of how people are forced to live in these situations. There's a reason why they call that stretch of Louisiana along the river Cancer Alley. And it's because of the industrial facilities there, and it's because of the pollution that's already in the water.
Okay, Jane, thanks a lot. We have 4 minutes left, and I've got one question for that, but the important thing is we can continue this discussion, but on Slack. So if you look in the chat, you can find the link, and I hope some of the presenters will also be able to be there and answer some more of your questions as well. The organizations behind this side event, there's a lot of knowledge and expertise in there, so feel free to reach out to us as well. And having said that, I do want to thank the technical staff making this side event possible. Do want to thank the interpreters, the people that did the captioning. I want to thank the speakers and Iveta for helping on this. And maybe my last question will be a little bit in the air because we will be closing at some moment soon. But I saw several times passing in the chat, how can we live without plastic? Because if you hear all of this, the production, the waste management, all the other sides, can we do without? And I just want to put that as an open question to the panelists, because you probably get it more often. How should we envision a world without plastic or a world without plastic problems? And if you have a short answer to that, I see Sibyl laughing already. I think you've gotten this question many times before. So if you have a short, catchy answer that we all can use in future discussions.
So I know we all want a short and catchy solution to this big, messy problem, but unfortunately, it's going to take a long and messy process in order to really get ourselves out of the mess we've created. But the short answer I will give right now, for the sake of time, is that humanity has lived for millennia without plastics. It's only been since the 1950s that we started to massively produce huge amounts of plastic. So there's people alive today who can tell you how they lived just fine without plastics until the whole industry shifted quite dramatically after World War II. So I would say that we already have, in many places around the world, reusable and refill systems that work just fine, that don't rely on extractive fossil fuel, that don't produce excessive toxic waste, whether it's in a landfill or incinerated, or affecting people's air or water. So the solutions are already in place, and we just need to have the companies mimic those solutions at larger scale.
Thanks, Sibyl. Jane, Gab, Alejandra want to add on, otherwise I will put my final word in.
I just want to say quickly that we actually, as people, didn't create this problem, and we are not the ones creating demand for plastics. It's other large corporations that are creating the demand for plastics, and the onus of how to change and how to do better needs to be on them.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, then I will be closing, and we'll give you one last thought. When I was working on campaigns to stop the use of fossil fuel, especially coal, some 10, 15 years ago, everybody said we cannot live without coal. Well, it's very simple. Plastic is the new coal. It has an impact on climate, it has an impact on people, and it's obsolete. It's a stranded investment, and people are not aware of it yet. But it's like a zombie. It's still walking around, doesn't realize it's dead, but just a matter of time. Plastic is the new coal. So I think we will be cut off in half a minute. I thank you all for participating. I hope you thought this was interesting. If you want to continue discussion, please go to Slack. If you want to have more information, contact the speakers, whatever, please reach out to us. And I wish you a lot of fun with all the other side events that will be going on in and around COP26. So thanks so much for presenting, listening, and joining in with all the questions. Sorry, we did not manage to answer all, but we have more answers. Have a great day, and hope to see you somewhere around the plastic games